What happens when the unseen woman holding up a billion-dollar empire finally lets go? Watch a terrified, gasping billionaire beg a mid-level manager to stay as his company suffocates. Her devastating revenge wasn't sabotage, it was malicious compliance. Watch until the end to witness the brutal collapse. Have you ever felt the exact terrifying moment when a profound loyalty simply evaporates? It doesn't happen with a violent scream or a shattered glass. It happens in the dead, suffocating silence of a heart realizing it has been completely bled dry. Welcome to the 42nd floor of Sterling Global, where the air in the boardroom had grown so icy and thick with unsaid truths that it was entirely impossible to breathe. At When Home Hurts 2 warmly welcomes you to a journey into the darkest, most hidden corners of betrayal and the fierce reclamation of self-worth. If you have ever poured your absolute soul into something, silently carrying the crushing weight of 1,000 unacknowledged problems on your shoulders, only to watch someone with a louder voice and a shinier veneer walk away with your rightful reward, please subscribe to our channel right now. Your support is the engine that gives us the strength to keep bringing these hidden, deeply human stories into the light. The silence in that grand, glass-walled room was completely breathtaking. It was a heavy, paralyzing quiet, suddenly punctured by a single, sharp sound. The hollow plastic clack of a company ID badge being laid gently onto the polished mahogany table. Emily did not slam it down. She did not raise her voice, nor did she demand a single syllable of explanation from the terrified board of directors staring back at her with wide, stunned eyes. She merely smoothed the lapel of her blazer, turned her back, and walked away from the massive empire she had secretly kept from burning to the ground for the past 3 years. Seconds later, the heavy oak doors burst violently open. Daniel Sterling, the billionaire visionary whose flawless face graced the covers of elite financial magazines worldwide, sprinted down the hallway like a man running from his own execution. He was gasping for air, his custom-tailored tie askew, his eyes wide with a frantic, desperate terror as he chased her toward the elevators. "Emily, wait! Please, just wait!" he begged, the raw, pathetic panic in his voice echoing off the cold marble walls. But as the silver elevator doors began to slide shut, the look Emily offered him was not one of lingering anger. It was something infinitely more terrifying to a man who thought he owned the world. It was a look of total, irreversible emptiness. To understand why one of the most powerful men in the city was hyperventilating, begging a quiet, mid-level manager to stay, we must uncover the staggering truth of what happens when the world takes its silent firekeepers for granted. To comprehend the sheer magnitude of Daniel's terror in that elevator lobby, we must first look past the glittering facade of Sterling Global and descend into the invisible trenches where Emily spent 3 grueling years. Officially, Emily was titled Senior Coordinator of Operations, a purposely vague designation that carried a thoroughly mediocre salary and absolutely zero public prestige. Unofficially, she was the central nervous system of a billion-dollar beast. Sterling Global was not a well-oiled machine. It was a chaotic, fragile house of cards held together by the sheer force of Emily's unrelenting competence. When a major supply chain collapsed in Europe, it was Emily who stayed awake for 72 hours straight, calling in personal favors and rerouting shipments while the executive board slept soundly in their penthouses. When a catastrophic PR nightmare threatened to tank their stock, it was Emily who drafted the flawless response, sliding it across Daniel's desk just in time for him to read it seamlessly onto a teleprompter. She was the ghost in the machine, the silent mechanic who anticipated the engine failures long before the warning lights ever flashed. For a long time, she convinced herself that the work itself was enough. She believed the tired corporate lie that loyalty would eventually be recognized, that her quiet sacrifices were building a solid foundation for her own future. She absorbed the stress, swallowed the panic attacks in bathroom stalls, and smiled politely while men in custom suits clinked champagne glasses over triumphs she had entirely engineered. But being the unseen atlas of an empire is a lonely, soul-crushing existence. You begin to feel less like a human being and more like a load-bearing wall, entirely unnoticed until you threaten to crack. The tragedy of absolute reliability is that people simply stop viewing it as a massive effort. They start viewing it as a basic entitlement. Daniel didn't see a brilliant strategist when he looked at Emily. He saw a comfortable safety net that he assumed would catch him forever, completely oblivious to the fact that the threads were beginning to fray under the immense, unacknowledged strain. Yet, the human heart can only sustain itself on the meager scraps of invisible duty for so long before the starvation inevitably twists into a profound, clarifying grief. The breaking point did not arrive during a normal workday. It came at the spectacular culmination of the Vanguard acquisition, the largest corporate merger in the company's history. For 8 brutal months, Emily lived and breathed the Vanguard deal. She found the hidden liabilities, she restructured the failing contracts, and she personally negotiated the hostile terms down to a quiet handshake. She poured her absolute soul into that portfolio, missing her sister's wedding and her own 30th birthday to ensure the empire expanded. It was her masterpiece. But when the dust settled and the massive bonuses were distributed, Emily was not invited to the executive celebration dinner. Instead, she sat in her cubicle, watching a company-wide broadcast where Daniel proudly announced the appointment of the new Vice President of Global Strategy, Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a man whose entire contribution to the Vanguard deal consisted of summarizing Emily's exhaustive reports into bullet points and presenting them with a charming, easy smile. He had the right pedigree, the right golf swing, and the loud, confident voice that the board adored. As Emily watched Marcus shake Daniel's hand on that screen, basking in the applause for a grueling war he did not fight, something fundamental inside her chest simply snapped. It wasn't just the loss of a promotion. It was the brutal, undeniable realization that she was entirely disposable in their eyes. She saw with terrifying clarity that they would drain her of every brilliant idea, every drop of energy, every hour of her youth, and they would never, ever invite her to sit at the table. The illusion of meritocracy shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She realized that the harder she worked, the less they respected her, because her endless sacrifices had taught them that her labor was incredibly cheap. She wasn't building an empire for herself. She was just laying the golden bricks for someone else's throne. That was the exact second the blind devotion died, replaced by a cold, calculating detachment that would soon bring Sterling Global to its knees. Emily did not march into HR to complain, nor did she confront Marcus about his unearned triumph. Instead, she quietly initiated the most devastating revenge possible. She simply started doing only what her job description required. The transition was completely invisible at first. When the marketing department submitted a flawed budget on a Friday afternoon, Emily didn't stay until midnight fixing their mathematical errors. She simply forwarded it as it was, turning her computer off precisely at 5 o'clock. When a high-maintenance client threatened to walk, she didn't jump in to soothe their ego. She redirected the call to Marcus's office, letting the new Vice President of Strategy handle the fire he was supposedly so qualified to extinguish. It was a masterclass in malicious compliance. Without Emily acting as the unofficial shock absorber, the chaotic reality of Sterling Global began to bleed through the cracks. Projects stalled. Deadlines were spectacularly missed. Minor inconveniences snowballed into million-dollar disasters. Panic slowly began to seep into the executive suites as the board realized the ship was taking on water faster than they could bail it out. Daniel grew increasingly irritable, demanding to know why operations were suddenly so sluggish, completely failing to connect the dots. Emily watched it all unfold with a serene, unbothered calm, meticulously documenting her handover files. She was watching the empire she built suffocate on its own incompetence. The executives assumed they were experiencing an unlucky streak of systemic failures, entirely ignorant of the fact that the actual system was a woman sitting quietly on the 42nd floor, entirely finished with saving them from themselves. She spent her evenings updating her resume, securing a far superior position at a firm that immediately recognized the staggering depth of her abilities. Every passing day was just a countdown, a quiet gathering of her strength as she prepared to remove the final, critical pillar holding up Daniel's arrogant sky. By the time she finally laid that plastic ID badge on the mahogany table, the foundation of Daniel's empire was already a hollowed-out shell, just waiting for the final gust of wind to bring it crashing down. When those silver elevator doors closed, severing Daniel's desperate pleas, Emily felt a rush of oxygen hit her lungs for the first time in years. Downstairs, she stepped out into the crisp autumn air, leaving the frantic hyperventilation of a billionaire trapped in his own collapsing ivory tower far behind her. The aftermath at Sterling Global was as swift as it was brutal. Within 3 weeks, the Vanguard merger nearly imploded because Marcus couldn't navigate the complex regulatory hurdles Emily had mapped out in her head. Without her preemptive crisis management, 2 major clients jumped ship, citing a sudden, catastrophic drop in operational competence. The board of directors, finally realizing the true origin of their past success, turned on Daniel, demanding answers for how he had allowed their most vital, invisible asset to walk out the front door. Daniel's flawless reputation began to bleed across the financial papers, not as a visionary, but as a man who fundamentally misunderstood the architecture of his own success. Meanwhile, Emily thrived. She took her brilliant mind to a place where her voice was not just heard, but sought after, earning a seat at the head of a table she never had to secretly build in the dark. Her story is not just a tale of corporate revenge. It is a profound testament to human dignity. It is a harsh, glaring warning to every leader who mistakes silence for complacency and loyalty for weakness. Never assume that the people quietly holding up your world won't eventually realize the immense power of their own hands and choose to simply let go. True power doesn't always reside in the loudest voice in the boardroom or the highest title on the door. More often than not, it lives in the quiet, steady pulse of the people who actually know how to keep the fires burning. And when you extinguish their spirit, you do not just lose an employee, you lose the very light that allowed you to shine in the first place. Emily's journey from the unseen backbone of a billion-dollar empire to a fiercely independent leader is a masterclass in recognizing one's own worth. For years, she sacrificed her well-being, personal life, and mental health on the altar of corporate loyalty, believing the illusion that hard work alone would yield rightful recognition. Instead, she became a victim of her own immense competence, reduced to a disposable safety net for a leadership team that happily claimed her victories as their own. The turning point was not a dramatic confrontation, but a profound internal awakening. By quietly withdrawing her uncompensated emotional and intellectual labor, she exposed the glaring incompetence of those who sat at the top. The collapse of Sterling Global was not an act of active sabotage, but the natural consequence of taking foundational pillars for granted. Emily's story serves as a resounding reminder that true power does not lie in titles, corner offices, or empty corporate praise. It resides in the undeniable value of one's skills and the courage to take them where they are properly valued. Her deliberate transition from an invisible workhorse to an empowered executive illustrates the supreme importance of boundaries. When she finally stopped bleeding for an organization that only wanted her gold, she didn't just break the system, she broke free. She reclaimed her dignity, proving that sometimes the most devastating and effective way to demand respect is to simply stop giving your brilliance away for free and let gravity do the rest. The deepest lesson here is that unchecked loyalty in the absence of mutual respect breeds exploitation, not reward. Competence can easily become a curse if you consistently over-deliver for people who view your extraordinary effort as a baseline expectation. You cannot outwork a system, a company, or a relationship that fundamentally takes you for granted. Take an honest inventory of your current professional and personal environments. Are you playing the role of the invisible, load-bearing wall? If you are constantly stepping outside your required duties to save people from their own mistakes without receiving recognition or adequate compensation, it is time to establish firm boundaries. Practice the art of stepping back. Stop doing the extra invisible work just to keep the peace. Channel that surplus energy into building your own skills, updating your resume, or investing in environments that actively celebrate your presence rather than merely exploiting your utility. Know your worth, and never be afraid to let a poorly built system fail without your unpaid rescue efforts. Have you ever felt like you were doing the work of 3 people but getting the recognition of 0? Please take a moment to share your experiences and perspectives in the comments section below. We would love to read your thoughts and have the community learn from one another. If you enjoyed this story and found value in the lesson, please subscribe to the channel. Your support gives us the motivation to keep creating high-quality content for you.